So, I'm going to talk a little bit today about remarriage in later life. Um, just to give you a little background about why I chose this topic, I myself am a divorcee and, well, twice divorcee. And I am getting up there myself in years, and I would like to see myself being married again, but I also know that there are barriers that exist within myself. And so I just got interested to know, like, okay, are there anybody else experiencing these same barriers? And if they are, what are they doing about it and how are they getting over it? So, um, my mother, she is 65 and she remarried at 60. And so I got to kind of see a little bit of how that works out because she had been single for 15 years. She was widowed. And I just never saw her getting married at 60 years old. But it's turned out to be a great experience to watch. So I thought, you know what, let me look into this a little bit and see what does the statistics say about marrying in later years, in later life, the later stage of your life versus second marriages in an earlier stage of your life, because we already know that statistics are pretty um, inconsistent and as it relates to second marriages, but there is some uniformity that says that second marriages tend to have a divorce rate that is greater than first marriages, which I was really not surprised to hear because I do know of some great first marriages that last a really long time, and then I know some second marriages that didn't last very long at all. And so I know that there are a lot of things that go into that. And so it was important to me to kind of see this from the lens of what does remarriage, second marriages look like in an aging population. That was more important at this point. So I just wanted to kind of give you some background information. Just so you know, remarriages, 30% of all marriages represent remarriages. So that's a lot. So a lot of our current marriages today are not considered first marriages. So at least 30% of them aren't. The baby boomers, obviously, you know, this population is either divorced or mainly widowed. A lot of them are. And remarrying is actually on an incline with this population. When I say this population, I'm referring to the baby boomer population. Marriage is on the incline for this population. So, there are probably a lot of reasons that go into that. And so we're going to take a look at that as well. But in 1970, we were in something that has been coined as marriage culture. Marriage culture reinforced marriage and it actually discouraged divorce. And more recently, marriage culture has been replaced by divorce culture. And you see that today in divorce parties, and you can go into any party store now and you can find just a section with just, you know, the balloons and the sayings and all that stuff. You know, just t-shirts are being made up. I mean, I've just seen divorce culture just explode with this generation. And so marriage culture beliefs, let's look at what some of those are. Marriage culture beliefs, number one, marrying is a given. So there was a time when we were growing up as kids, you know, as young girls, we played, you know, house and, you know, we had, you know, play marriages. And it was just a given that you would just grow up one day and that you would just have a husband and you'd have a family. And I don't know if I necessarily thought about a career because I think even in the way I was raised, I was just raised playing with baby dolls and little kitchenettes and things of that nature. I didn't really see myself having a career because honestly, that wasn't the largest thing that was being reinforced. What was being reinforced was marriage culture. And marrying was a given. Marriage was forever. So when we got married, when we lived in marriage culture, when we got married, we didn't go into it thinking, oh, well, one day this is going to be over. Today, you see prenups are huge today amongst people in their first marriages. And it's because they literally kind of go into this believing that it's not going to last. And That's not something that you see in marriage culture. That's more privy to divorce culture. And then also too, in marriage culture, divorce is the last resort. So in marriage culture, you didn't just divorce your husband. A lot of times, even if there was infidelity, I mean, there were ways to work through that. You saw a counselor, therapy, whatever, but you did not leave your husband based on infidelity or anything like that. Marriage is was forever. And so that was the belief system in the 1960s, 70s, and beyond. Divorce culture, which has different beliefs, divorce culture says that marriage is an option. So we're no longer as kids, and I don't know this to be the case, but are we as kids preparing our children for marriage? Are we preparing our children for rearing of children and domestic responsibilities and all those things? Probably not. I think in divorce culture, we're preparing our girls and boys alike for careers and to be successful, but I don't think marriage is no longer a given as it was in marriage culture. Marrying is contingent, so it's contingent on a lot of things. It's not even anything that you can honestly say you want to do. Like, when you were growing up, you're like, oh yeah, I'm going to grow up and I'm going to get married. It's contingent now. I might get married. It just depends. It depends on how soon I'm able to make six figures a year. It depends on, how ready we are to buy that home, or how, like there's a lot of contingencies to whether people are going to get married or not get married. And you've seen people stay engaged literally forever because they had so many contingencies upon when they could get married. If they had $10,000, $20,000 saved before a wedding or whatever, it was contingent. And then also too, a divorce culture belief is that divorce is a gateway. And so what that means is, and my research says that in this way, the gateway of divorce may result in a greater balancing of power in later life remarriages and increased attention to the needs of each partner. So basically, what this is saying is they keep in their minds the whole time that if this doesn't work, I'll just divorce you. I've done it before. I can do it again. I'm not going to live my life unhappy. And so this gets used a lot of times in marriages as kind of like the word that they use was a balancing of power. But I think the term that, if you just want to just make it really plain, is it's just basically a threat. It's just something that we use to say, hey, if you don't get it together, I'm out of here. And that is a divorce culture belief system and mindset. Okay, so moving right along. So today's older women, when I say older, I'm going to include myself in that. I'm 47 years old. But today's women of a certain age, were socialized with traditional gender norms. So we were solely responsible in our marriages, in our first marriages, most likely, for domestic responsibilities, for the child rearing, and then also too for the marital relationship. We were responsible for keeping everything together. And this was regardless of a woman's employment status. So it doesn't mean that just because a woman headed out into the workforce that she's no longer responsible for all these other things. It means that she's responsible for going to work. She's responsible for the domestic responsibilities in the house. She's responsible for rearing the kids, helping the kids with the homework. And that puts a lot of stress on women. And it can be overwhelming. Now, women have done it for decades, and my mother did it. But in reality, when you're talking about second marriages and a woman actually entering into a second marriage, you have to know that she's going to be weighing out her responsibilities in this. There may not be issues with child rearing and things of that nature because children tend to be already adults and out of the home, with these types of second marriages at this age. But also too, there's a responsibility of, domestic responsibilities of cooking and cleaning. And a lot of women by this time, they are knee deep in their careers and don't really want the responsibility, or they may even be retired, but they don't really want the responsibility of not having a partner. And so I think that would be a deterrent to a lot of women when it comes to remarrying if they can't find a partner that accepts these different gender roles versus some of the traditional ones that obviously we've all been raised on. So there was some changes that were happening to these social constructs at one time. And one of the changes that happened was the feminist movement in the 1960s. So the feminist movement in the 1960s, the whole point of that was to foster gender equality, right? And so, but this did not lend itself to fair wages for women for doing the same amount of work that men did. So although women were working, they were bringing in an income, but they were still doing the lion's share of the housework and the lion's share of raising the children. There was a marital power that took place. So even though women did go into the workforce, that as long as they weren't making more money than men, then there was still the marital power still lied with the men and not with the women. And so even to today, women don't make as much as men for the same job, and a lot of that had to do with, and probably still has to do with, the fact that men have desired to keep the marital power in the relationship through their financial status. So that's something that was changing in the 1960s when feminism came on. Women were like, you know what, enough is enough. And they were kind of empowering themselves, which means that would cause divorces to take place because there was definitely a shift in power. The comparative resources of husband and wife, cultural or subcultural expectations about the distribution of marital power, culturally situated gender norms that promote male dominance and that reduced a woman's power by limiting the influence and the social value of the resources. And what I mean by that is income, education, and occupational status that she brings to the marriage. So women were not bringing as much to the marriage as men were bringing to the marriage. Thus, they were required and expected to take on a more subordinate role. And so that was starting to really shift. That was starting to really shift in the 1960s and 70s as well, even though we were still living under the umbrella of a marital culture. Studies suggest that couples in their first marriages and were married prior to the 1960s and who were now divorced did so following this social shift from marriage culture to divorce culture. So again, a lot of what took place as a result of the shift from marital culture to divorce culture. Divorce has become a more socially acceptable option. It was becoming a socially acceptable option then. There was more emphasis being placed on individualism, independence, personal happiness, and equality. Which obviously these are important elements in a marriage, right? Divorce, tend to act more like a lever that could be pulled to assert certain needs and expectations. However, in a marital culture, divorce was not even an option, right? So divorce kind of was like started to be used more like a lever that you could be pulled when to assert your needs and expectations when women began to seek individualism and independence and personal happiness and things of that nature. In my research, I looked at a study. The study was of just 24 divorced women between the ages of 50 and 77, and it revealed that at least half of the 24 described their first marriages as disappointing and described them as unsatisfying. And they cited a few reasons for why this was the case. And I'm just going to go through a few of them. One of them was emotional incompatibility and distance. The other one was physical and verbal abuse. The third one was alcoholism. The fourth one was repeated infidelity. And then the last one was lack of communication, affection, attention, and companionship. So when this study was done, at least half of the women claimed that these were some of the reasons that caused them to eventually divorce. Now, we know from our studies that some of these things could be worked through. with therapy. I mentioned infidelity, but I also mentioned that it was repeated infidelity. So it wasn't something that just happened one time and they were remorseful and they could go to therapy and maybe work through it. But this was repeated infidelity. This was repeated physical and verbal abuse. And this was repeated, emotional incompatibility and distance. And in those days, men, they worked and they took care of the family and they had all the responsibilities of taking care of the family. And a lot of times their wives were neglected in very meaningful ways. And so when I did my study on who was happy and who was not happy in marriages, first marriages, the study was overwhelmingly clear that men scored higher on the satisfied list in first marriages than women, that women were actually less satisfied in first marriages. But the trajectory changes quite a bit in second marriages. In second marriages, this is the women are more satisfied in second marriages than they are in first marriages. And I could see how that would be the case. So why remarry late in life if this is true, especially for women who were so discouraged in regards to their first marriages? Well, the data says that the prevalence of loneliness amongst people aged 50 to 65 years old is in the 8 to 10% range. So with approximately 20% classified as sometimes lonely, and the majority of the population defines as not lonely. So loneliness means that for some people, social networks are not functioning satisfactorily. So I'll give you an example. When I was married, my first marriage, we had a lot of married friends. And so we would do a lot of couples things together. And I felt like I had a really booming social life when I was married. However, as a single person, I noticed a lot of shifts when it came to my social life. I had to now create a social life, and that was kind of hard to do because you're like by yourself a lot. And I remember doing a lot of traveling alone, and it was fine. I enjoyed it for a time, but then after a while, I kind of identified with that loneliness of wanting a companion and someone to travel with and someone to enjoy life with and share life with. So that's probably driving a lot of older women to want to be married again. High levels of loneliness. It indicates low levels of social integration. It really does start to play on a lot, I think, of our own insecurities of growing old alone and unhappy. Who's happy and who's not in these relationships, and why remarry? Well, I think, like I said before, men are scoring higher on the satisfied list in first marriages, but women are scoring less satisfied in first marriages. But then also, too, I think it's important to understand that relationship quality is multidimensional, meaning that relationships change over time, right? So happiness declines over time. And I know a lot of people don't want to hear that, but happiness declines over time. Marital satisfaction tends to decrease, while marital negativity tends to increase. So this is actually a natural phenomenon that takes place in marriage, and it has to be worked through. So with that being said, with happiness declining over time, marital satisfaction decreasing over time, who's getting married, who's satisfied, and who's not? Well, I want to just kind of go over a few things that I listed here. Typically, 1/3 of first marriages are said to end in divorce versus half of all second marriages, according to the U.S. Census. So with that being said, you just know right there that second marriages are not always greater than first marriages. There's no data that actually says that it is. However, older couples who marry, meaning ages 50 plus, tend to report greater happiness in their second marriages than maybe, say, younger couples in their 20s and 30s. I think that our marital work ethic has increased over time, and we're more able to function within the guidelines of what it takes to be married and actually make it work. We tend to work harder on our second marriages than ever before. And the reason being is because second marriages usually unite us with mates with similar likes and dislikes, right? So we've already found that person that we knew we were incompatible with in our first marriage, but you know what? They were great providers, you know? So even though we didn't really have a lot in common, hey, they were great providers, so we married them anyway, right? So as we get older, as we age and we start looking at remarrying, we're starting to focus more on things that are important to us and things that we know are going to make the marriage work and last. And so one of those being getting with a partner that likes what you like, getting with a partner that dislikes what you dislike, you know. Also, I believe it's important that you're able to see the same big picture together. You know, I plan on retiring, you know, in 8 years. I have a 5 year plan, I have a 10 year plan, but I can be perfectly honest. When I was younger, I didn't have a day plan. It was like day to day to day to day, you know, and so I think as we get older, we start to see the same big picture. We're all going to be retiring soon, hopefully. We have grandchildren, we're empty nesters. So there's a lot of things that we can look at in a very positive manner as we begin to reflect on what remarriage would look like in our golden years. Being right isn't always effective as doing what works. So that's something that we learn, you know. I think it's just something that we learn in life in general, not so much even just in our first marriages. This is something that we have acquired as we have navigated, you know, through life. And we do learn that it's not a political exercise, but it's a functional partnership. And what I mean by that is, you know, if you ever heard a politician, they always say things like, well, we'll see what happens. We'll wait to see what happens. Well, we don't enter into second marriages saying we'll see what happens. We enter into second marriages knowing this is a functional partnership. And in a functional partnership, it takes communication, it takes honesty, and it takes compromise. And I think a lot of times, by the time we get to our second marriages, we've kind of figured that out a little bit. You value each other more. You know, being single will teach you a lot of lessons about what's important and what's not important. I know, at least for me personally, I had been married so long in my adult life that when I became single, I was just like, oh, this is what's going on out here. It was just, to me, it was just absolutely devastating dating life. It just wasn't really anything that I thought was great. And so once I find that person or that person finds me, I do believe that it'll be important that I value this person because I know that they are diamond in a rough. There's not a whole lot of you out there. And I think it's important that we get to that place, you know, in our singleness, that we understand, hey, if you find someone that's for you, there's probably not another one out there like them. Value this person. You learn to compromise. And according to my research, you also have better sex. And for some reason, I'm not going to refute that because I believe that by the time we all get to be, you know, 50, 60 years old, we've kind of figured some stuff out, you know, and even as it relates to that. So those are some of the reasons why my research has indicated that second marriages tend to work out a lot better in your golden years versus in your younger years, but you know, keeping in mind that second marriages do not have a higher statistical success rate than first marriages at all. But as you begin to age and as you begin to be able to see life a little bit different, those marriages tend to report very, very high satisfactory for both men and women, with greater compromise, greater value, and greater importance than ever before. So that's what I have for you today. I will wrap it up, but if you have any questions or if you have any comments, please feel free to leave me a question or a comment. Thank you for listening to this talk, and we'll talk later. Thanks.